Hello everyone. Welcome to our next episode of Developer Waypoints. We're in Season 3. I'd like to do the introductions for both of us today. My name is Michael Palermo with the Developer Relations team at HERE. And with me is Richard Süselbeck. How did I do?
Last name, very good.
Thank you.
First name, never ever do that again. So I would say 50%.
50. I almost felt like I had to cough, to say your name.
Well,
I want to hear you say it again.
Suffering from some horrible disease. Richard. That's the first name.
Richard.
No, that's not how you do it. And see, folks, this is why I tend to just introduce myself as Richard to spare myself and everyone else the pain.
Okay, that's fair. Well, listen, I'm very happy to be part of this episode today. But right before we get into some of this routing content, I just wanted to share that over the weekend, I had some discussions with friends and family about how all the world circumstances are somewhat causing us to, I guess maybe the best way to say it is an element of letting go. Maybe those sweatpants or track pants you're wearing a lot more often. It could be that you're just letting go a little bit. So what's your opinion on that? You think that's happening?
Well, I mean, nobody really knows, but neither you or me might be wearing pants right now.
That's a very strange thought. However, I'm gonna say this. The reason why I'm kind of reminded of that over the weekend is because we were just on a meeting a little while ago, unrelated to this episode, and you looked different. And I was thinking, I don't know if I've seen this version of Richard before. You had you were sporting some growth edge right here. And of course, now you're this cleanly shaven guy. But yes, so it looked like you were about to let go.
I hope it wasn't too bad. I was just trying to channel my inner Ray and see how far a beard could take me. And then I saw myself on WebEx in the proverbial mirror, and I decided, you know what? This episode is going on YouTube. I think I'm going to shave before I go out here.
Well, I am so glad, again, that we are in this exciting topic for Waypoints, because it's not that all the other ones aren't, but it seems to me that one of the most commonly asked questions or topics that's of high interest is when people are getting into routing. And so I suppose I would like to ask you, as you were building this series out, what was your motivation for how you wanted to go about it today?
Well, I have no idea how to answer that question. I really just wanted to do an episode about all of the core features in the SDK.
The core features, okay.
Yeah, basically all of the main stuff that's in there, and that's getting started. And then of course there's kind of the map stuff. So we did the camera, and then there's drawing things on the map with map markers. So we did that, and then we kind of go into more of the kind of traditional features that are also covered by REST APIs, like we did search in the last episode, and now we're doing routing. And I think particularly for the mobile SDKs, that's an interesting subject, because we all kind of rely on our mobile apps to get us where we're going. So routing is a pretty useful use case there.
Yeah. And I guess from your experience, when it comes to people who ask questions, or, I know we get them on a variety of things, but do you think that you'll cover some commonly asked questions in this episode, or do you know where I'm going with that? Like, is this the basics of how to get into routing with the mobile SDK, or are you going to share any little tips on what might be common things that people run into?
The idea really is that we learn how to get routing going on the mobile SDK. That said, as I always do, I'll share some tips in terms of maybe some problems I ran into, so you don't have to run into them.
Right.
And then as we go, if people have questions, they can just ask the questions in chat, and we can see what we can do. We can answer them. If there's something we want to look a little closer into, we can do that, always with the caveat, it's a 1-hour episode. We want to cover all of the basics, but we'll try to do that as well.
Cool. All right. Well, anything else before we get into the actual nitty-gritty of the code and all that stuff?
No, I've got my tea. I've got my Android Studio. I think we're ready to go.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and transition over to code view, which is currently not a code view. It looks like it is a wandering dinosaurs on desert plains view.
Well, that's just my desktop background. And if you're going to have a desktop background, why not make it dinosaurs?
Exactly.
Right? Makes life better.
Sure.
So, but even though they're cool, let's fire up Android Studio. I've got the app already running in the emulator. And because I made such a hash of the user interface in the last episode about search, I've decided to start this episode clean. For the other episodes, we kind of just always had the app from the previous episode, just added a little bit to it. But at the end of the last episode, like half the screen was just poorly thought out user interface, covering half of the map. So I took all that and threw it away.
Okay.
The thing I kept is the questionable choice in colors for the buttons, but everything else is gone.
Did you say questionable?
I did say questionable.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
My attempt here is to take some official corporate colors that we have.
Ah.
And use those. But the thing is about our corporate colors, you can't just randomly pick those colors. You have to pick the right color with the other color, and you have to have some sense of taste in order to do that, which I don't possess. And so these are just two colors which probably should not be next to each other or used on buttons or anything. So I'd probably be better off just making them blue or gray or whatever, but I stuck with those.
Okay.
So this app we have here is essentially just the Hello Map app from the examples you can get from GitHub with a few small changes. For one thing, I've focused on Barcelona because why not? Nice city. I've also added two buttons. One is called routing, the other is called clear. And these are hooked up to two empty methods I have here, calculate route and clear map. And then what you see down here is an empty text view, which is going to hold later on some additional information from the routing API.
Okay.
And what I want to build today is a very simple app where if you long press on the map, you can go and you can add waypoints, and it'll draw some markers on the map to highlight those waypoints so you remember where you clicked. And then you can click on the routing button, and then it will find out a route that goes through all of those waypoints in the order that you clicked. And then we'll pull out some additional information from the routing response. We'll put that into the text view here, and then we have a clear button so we can clear the screen again and do it all over. So nothing too complicated. Should require us to call the routing API, and in the process, hopefully we'll understand how routing works in the HERE SDK for Android.
Nice. Very good. Even with cleanup code. Sweet.
Well, that's just me being lazy because I don't want to restart the thing in the emulator all the time. It's fast.
Are you still there, Richard? I may have lost Richard. Are you there? I hear you.
Oh, okay.
I lost you for a moment, and now you're back.
Okay, am I back? Okay, that's great. So when did you lose me? Did I finish my thought?
You know what? It was so unexpected, I don't know. So go back to the beginning of... I think the viewers are happy that you're back. I'm very happy you're back. because I don't know what I would have done. I have some card tricks,
We talked about the dance routine that you practiced,
Okay, so thankfully you're back, and now why don't you go ahead and finish? You went through the point where I think the last thing I mentioned was you were at least you have some cleanup code.
And I don't think I had any interesting comments on that, except to say that that's just me being lazy, because it's easier and faster to write 3 lines of map cleanup code than to just keep restarting the app in the emulator. So
that's where we were. Okay.
So another thing I've done to this is I've just added a drawable here for a little waypoint icon that I've added. And honestly, I think that's all I've done. I've got the map view here, and that's wired up. And then I've got the route text view that we talked about. I've got that wired up here as well, find view by ID. And that's it. We got nothing else except 2 empty message and the boilerplate code from the Hello Map app. So let's get started with this. So in order to get routing going, we need the routing engine. So let's get a private routing engine. Call it routing engine. And we'll use that to later calculate a route. Another thing we need is a list of waypoints. So we'll say list waypoint, we're calling it waypoints. And this is just the list in which we drop the waypoints after long pressing on the map. The long press on the map, we generate a waypoint and we're tossing it into that list. This will later be a parameter for the routing API. And as you'll notice, the waypoint is again an object from the class from the SDK that encapsulates a geo coordinate and possibly some other parameters. We'll mostly use it to put a geo coordinate in, though if we have some time at the end, we can talk about things like stopovers and pass-throughs as well.
Okay.
Then what we need is a list of map markers. Again, when we long press on the map, what we'll do is, yes, we'll drop that location into the list of waypoints, but we'll also create a list of markers. So we'll call it waypoint markers. Also make that a new array list. And the reason I'm tossing them into a list is because that makes it much easier to clean them up. So this is something we'll use later in the clear map function. If you collect all of your markers in a list, you can then just later iterate through the list and remove every single one from the map. And then another thing we need to do, because to draw the route on the map, we need a map polyline, which if we remembered from an earlier episode, that's the object, how we're going to call this, we can call it route polyline. That is a map item object we can use to draw lines on the map. There's also map polygon and map circle and some others along those lines.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, those polylines are not necessarily the routes, but they're just a visual aid at some point. Or are these the actual route lines?
So we'll take the information about the route from the routing response. And we'll turn that into a polyline that we can draw on the map.
Gotcha.
So we'll get later on from the routing API, we'll get back a route object.
Right.
And that will have all kinds of information in it, but also very conveniently, it will immediately have a ready-made polyline object. So it's not like we have to go and take the individual latitudes and longitudes and format them into a geopolyline, and then take that geopolyline and turn that into a map polyline and generate a map polyline that does that all automatically for us. We could do that. We can still get at that information if we want to process it in other ways, but just for drawing on the map, it's a very simple way of doing it.
I see. Okay. And this is basically the placeholder for that result.
Exactly.
Okay. Oh no. Another challenge. Hopefully he will be back. You are back. So we had just a little issue again with your connection.
So this is starting to worry me, but I don't know what we're not doing anything differently than before.
No, it just might be. I'd say, go with your train of thought.
Yes, I think my guess is it'll happen like a few more times throughout the stream, and we'll just work through it. This is a live stream. Some issues are expected. I'll probably make a hash of the code at some point. If our system makes a hash of the video once or twice, that's fine. We'll just have to live with that.
Shruti says this is a hashtag Berlin things.
I'm not going to even get into that. Okay. Good. Okay, so now that we've set up here a routing engine, we actually want to initialize that. The onCreate method is not a bad place to do that, so let's do that here. So we need to do that in a try catch block, and it might throw an instantiation error exception, and then, you know, if we wanted to, we could do error handling here. We'll just assume for now, for the purpose of this demo, it'll all go well. And then we're saying routing engine equals new routing engine. Obviously, we throw a runtime error exception or something here at this point, but as you know, I prefer to skip over the boring error handling parts in these streams because we only have an hour to go. Also, they're boring, and I don't like writing them, so don't know if that makes me a particularly great developer, but here we go. So we've got our routing engine set up, and we can use it now. That's good. The next thing we kind of need to do is get waypoints. In order to get waypoints, we need to figure out how do we do that long press on the map. For that, we'll create a new method. Call it private void set long press. How did I call it in my notes? Set long press gesture handler. Yes. Also a long
name.
Long name. set long press gesture handler, and then we are going and saying map view, which is, if you remember, the map in our Android SDK just happens to be like any other Android view, so it's just a view, hence it's being called map view. And from that, we'll say get gestures, and in get gestures, we'll have set long press listener, and that gets gives us a gesture state and a point to D, though I will not call it. No, I think it needs to be. No, should be okay. And a point to D, but I think we'll call it touch point. And then it'll give us a, actually, I've always done this with these callback functions, and I wanted to try a lambda. So I'm going to try that. Let's see if that works, or if this is the point where I first make a hash of the code. So we'll have this, and then we'll have the method here. Yeah, I think that's it already, and that is much nicer than creating new something gesture response handler or whatever. So this is nice. So we'll have gesture state and touch point, and then we'll say if gesture state equals gesture state dot begin. So the moment you detect a long press, we want to do something, and what we want to do is something. But for this to work, we of course need to first go and actually call this. We can also do this in our onCreate method. So this method is now being called, and if we now long press on the map, it should fire, and we can now start doing things like adding map markers and adding our waypoints to the map. So that's what we're going to do.
Okay.
We've done markers before in a previous episode. So we remember the first thing we need is a map image. We're calling it waypoint image equals, and then we have like this factory. I think it's called map image factory, and we'll do it from resource, and we need to pass this the context get resources, and then we'll say r dot drawable dot waypoint, and that's the one, if you remember, I had added earlier. Now we've got an image.
Hey,
then,
right before you go forward, I'm just curious because I can't see the font very well, but
yeah, we can increase that further.
Oh, okay, great. So the question I have for you is, isn't there supposed to be a closing parentheses for the line 147, the set long press listener, that first open parentheses, where does that close?
I think you're right. I see my little red squiggle here. So I'll increase the font size a little bit for everyone.
Okay.
I think that's helpful. Appearance. I think I'll just search for font. Don't want to use a custom font. Font size, presentation mode, editor, general. Font, here we go. And then we'll increase the font size to 20.
That should work.
Better, right?
Yeah. So I wasn't able to tell what that was, but it looks like there was not only a missing parentheses, but maybe a missing curly brace as well.
No, I think we got 2 missing parentheses.
Okay.
And I close those now, and it's not longer giving me any squiggly things, except for the green one, where annoyingly Android Studio wants to correct your spelling, and it wants you to capitalize point, which is not how you spell waypoint, so that drives me nuts. But I promised myself I was not going to do another rant on Android Studio today. So
okay.
We'll just leave it at that. So then we can create a map marker, which is, we'll call Waypoint Marker, and that's a new map marker. And the map marker wants, I think, a geo coordinate and an image. So now the interesting question is, where do we get the geo coordinate? Well, we have this touch point, but that touch point is in pixels. So it tells me in pixels where I touch the screen. So that isn't quite right, but the good news is in map view, there is a method called view to geo coordinates. And so if I give that a point to the pixel coordinate, it will automatically turn that into geo coordinates. So we can use that here. And then of course we can give it the waypoint image. And it happily accepts that. And then what we need to do is once again say map view, get map scene, dot add map marker, give it the waypoint marker. And what we also want to do, remember we had our waypoint markers list, and we want to add that there as well. So later on we can do some cleanup, waypoint marker. Okay, so now my view is that if I start this now and I do a long press on the screen, a map marker should appear there. Shall we try this hypothesis?
Let's try it.
Okay, so we got our here, I'm building this, Gradle build running. I'm just slightly superstitious with Android Studio. I just hit Gradle build way too often. Usually for good reasons, because then it's, even though it didn't work before, it suddenly starts working magically afterwards.
And while we're waiting, Shruti mentioned it also wants you to use American English. It's color with a U. Not.
Well, I no longer have a strong opinion on that because I've realized that I just mix these things like randomly in between. So I feel like I can't do that. Also, where have I used color? Have I even used color?
I don't know.
I don't
think
know
so.
either. However, there is a color object which we'll be using later, and that uses American spelling without a Q. So we want to be consistent, and we're going to be using
Sure.
the American spelling for now. Okay, so we've got this launched in our emulator, and now I'm just going to hold the mouse button down, and woohoo, it works. Okay, so we got one map marker, got another map marker, got another map marker. Now, I'm clicking routing, and obviously nothing happens yet because we haven't done anything with the calculate route method, and we haven't used our routing engine or anything yet. However, we have been able to create the waypoints that we want the route to go through. We're displaying them on the map, so that's really nice. Off to a good start, I would say. So, I guess the next step would be to go into calculate route and actually fire up our routing engine. So let's do that. Let's go routing engine, calculate route. And if you go through the options it shows you here, you'll see it takes a list of waypoints, it takes car options, and it takes a callback function. And there are 3 different method overloads, and the only way in that they're different is that one takes car options, the other takes truck options, and the third one takes pedestrian options. And this already tells you the 3 main modes of transport we can currently do with the routing engine on the mobile SDK. So the good news is we have a list of waypoints already. So we can just say, do it this way, because this will get a little bit longer. So we can just say waypoints. Now we need car options. We'll dig into those a little later, but the good news is if you just say new car options, it'll generate acceptable default values. So you don't fiddle with it at all if you don't want to. We'll look at what the default options are in a minute.
Could you pass those into the constructor right there if you knew what those were? Or do you have to... Yeah, okay.
Yes, I could, though I'd have to create some intermediate.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay.
It ends up being like 3 other lines of code, and we'll do an attempt at that later on. And
okay.
We'll start writing here, but we just want to get a route going as quickly as possible. So we'll be looking into that now. We'll do that later. And then, of course, we have our new. I'm going to look at what it's called. Calculate route callback kind of makes sense. So I probably should have created that as a Lambda too, but since it has conveniently written all the boilerplate for me, I'm just going to ignore that. The one thing I'm going to change is I'm going to change the name list here to routes, because that's what we're getting back. So we're getting a potential routing error back if something goes wrong, or we're getting a list of routes back. This is kind of important. We're not getting a route back, we're getting a list of routes back. So we can now say if routing error equals null, in which case everything went fine. We can handle the route, else we can say Richard doesn't like error handling.
Right. So question for you on that list of routes, since you made that apparent. By routes, are you referring to that it has multiple waypoints, or by routes do you mean it's something else?
I mean it's something else. So one of the parameters you could put into the car option is the alternates parameter, or alternatives. It's alternatives, I believe. Alternative parameter. And you could set that, for example, to 3. And then it would not just give you one route, it would give you the best route it could find, the second best route, and the third best route it could find.
Gotcha.
So
cool.
if you've ever used a mapping application and it gave you kind of a list of options, of alternatives that you could choose for your route, that's how you do that.
Cool. And hey, just to give you the heads up, we're about halfway, so that seems like we're on target.
Yeah, I think we're on target. I mean, we're getting close to actually displaying a route on the map, and once we've done that, I think we've sort of check the basics, and then we can look into some other things like changing some of the parameters and whatever else maybe there. So I think we're good on time.
Good.
So what I'll do here is I'll create a route object and say routes.get 0. So I'll get the first route. I should probably also check to see that that isn't 0, though I think if there was no route in here, I would have gotten a routing error. The routing error would have told me, oh, I can't find a route based on the crazy waypoints you've put in certain different continents or something. So I think that should be safe to do here. So we'll do routes get 1, and now we have the first route that it returned. In our case, I believe the default value for alternatives is 1, so there's only 1. So we're not going to do any loops here or anything for the time being. And now that we have this route object, what we probably want to do is we want to draw that route on a map. And for that, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a method, private void draw route. We're going to give it a route as a parameter. And what we need to do now is we simply need to draw the route on the map. So I actually may have overpromised slightly. It does not give you a finished map polyline object. What it gives you is a geo polyline object, which automatically encapsulates the geometry of the route. So all of those latitudes and longitudes, yes, you don't have to take those manually and create a geo polyline, but we still need to take that geo polyline and create a map polyline, which is the map object.
Okay.
Right? So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a geo polyline object. We're calling it route geo polyline. And then what's slightly annoying about this is you always have to do it in a try-catch block. And again, you have to catch an instantiation error exception. And the reason for that is you can't instantiate a polyline with less than 2 coordinates. So if you just put 1 coordinate in it, you get an error because then it's not a line, it's a point. Similarly, if you do a map polygon, you have to put in at least 3 so the polygon can close. And that's why these always have a try-catch block. So we're going to do a return here so it interrupts in case something goes wrong. That shouldn't really be the case here because there's no root with that, and we'll say new geo polyline, and we're saying route get polyline. There you go. So now we have the geometry captured, and then what we need to do is we need our route polyline, which is a map polyline object, which I probably should have called route map polyline to make it less confusing, but it's too late now. And we'll say this is a new map polyline, and that map polyline as parameter is, what does that want? Let's have a look. It wants a geopolyline. We've got that, and it wants a double, which is the width of the line for drawing it on the map, and then it wants a color. As we can see, the font is very small, but it is a color without a hue. And in fact, what's slightly confusing is there is both a color object in Android and a color object in the SDK, and what we want here is the color object from the SDK. So we'll put in the route geopolyline, We'll say line thickness, let's maybe go with 20. We can change that later if it's weird. And for the color, I made a note earlier because I don't want to type that. We'll create a new color object with appropriate values. This should be some sort of blue, if I remember correctly what I did earlier. And then all we need to do is say map view, get map view, get map scene, add, just as we added map marker, we can now add map polyline, and adding the route polyline to it. So this should now draw the polyline on the map after we've hit the routing button. Shall we try this?
Sure.
Sip of tea while it loads. Okay, so I'm gonna put one marker here. I'm gonna put one marker here. And then I'm gonna hit the routing button. And it doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Let's follow this through. Maybe we might have forgotten something super obvious. So calculate, we're calling calculate route. That should work. We're calling the routing engine. So we might have a routing error. I guess we'll have to see if there's maybe a routing error, and my lack of error handling is a mistake. Let me check the log real quick to see if there's anything. Let's run this again. Anything that pops up at the end that might give us an indication. Running this, taking one marker, taking another marker, hitting routing. Waypoints must have at least 2 elements. So it looks like possibly we see the routing engine automatically throws error logs in there. I don't even need to do any error. See, it's all good.
That's interesting.
So something goes wrong when we are adding the waypoints. So this should probably be in here.
So the very first, is that the reason?
We're never, I don't think we're ever even adding the actual waypoint into the list of waypoints. We've added the markers. And we've added the marker to the list of waypoint markers, but what we've completely forgotten is to say waypoints.add to waypoint. And then we'll again go with map view.view to Geo Coordinates, and we're throwing the touch point in there. So we completely forgot to actually add the waypoints to the waypoints list. So that couldn't possibly work. Let's try this again. Clicking on this, clicking on this, clicking routing, and boom,
there you go.
It works. Sometimes you find that your error is so dumb it's very easy to find. So far, so good. Maybe very quickly, we'll actually write the clear method to make our life easier.
Okay.
In this case, it's pretty simple. All we have to do is say for each map marker in waypoint markers, go and say map view dot get map scene dot remove map marker, and we'll throw in the marker. That removes all our markers. And then also what we want to do is map view get map scene, remove map polyline, and we'll have our route polyline that we've saved. We'll throw that in there. Let's give that a quick try. See if that properly clears our screen. And here you see why it's useful to toss your markers into a list, because in order to remove them, you need a reference to the marker you want to remove.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes with individual markers, you might have that reference because you have stored in a separate variable or something. But if you're just tossing a lot of markers on the map, it's a good idea to have to sort of group them in lists in order to be able to remove them all at once. So I'm actually going to do something else. I'm going to add 4 markers, because so far we've only added 2, and the routing API should handle more waypoints than just 2. So we'll hit routing. Works pretty well. I've noticed something here, and I've noticed that the routing always tends to avoid this area, which is kind of the old downtown area. And if you've been there, I I remember this is kind of an area with very narrow streets and lots of pedestrian areas and one-way streets. So going through here with the car, if even possible, is going to be tricky. And we can maybe use this to test like the difference between car options and pedestrian options. So we'll do that in a minute. So we've tested multiple waypoints. We're testing the clear function, which works just fine. Let's see, but if I hit the routing button without adding new waypoints, this is an interesting bug, which we'll ignore for the time being.
Could you just clear the waypoints list?
Yeah, you're right. I also need to clear the waypoints list probably, because yeah, you can see it's still going through the other things. So that's good. So we need to say waypoints dot clear. There we go.
I think that should
solve that particular problem. Nice. So if you remember earlier on, we added this little area, this little text view here as well. And I'm going to use that to show you that you can get some other information out of the routing API as well. So we're going back into draw route, and we're saying route text view append, and we'll say something like, you will arrive at your destination in, and then we go to the route, and we can say get duration in seconds. And for a real application, you'd probably like divide that by 60 or something to get it in minutes. But we'll work with seconds now for efficiency, and say seconds. And what we can also do is we can say, let's grab something else. Your destination is at length in meters, and then say meters away. And we'll run this. One point, another point, hit routing, and then it says you will arrive at your destination in 493 seconds. Your destination is, in this case, about 3 kilometers away. So you'll notice the route object actually has a whole lot of interesting things in it. For example, you can get a bounding box. This is super useful. If you remember an earlier episode, we did camera handling, and there was a way to focus the camera in such a way that a bounding box was in view of the camera. So what you can do here is you can get the bounding box, which is a geo box, and then we remember there was a way to set the camera that takes a geo box as a parameter. And so what you can do after hitting the routing button, you can just automatically change the camera view in such a way so that it focuses completely on the route and ensures the route is completely visible on the screen.
Nice.
You can get traffic delay in seconds. So by default, I believe the car options will take live traffic information into account. And so what you could do is you could get the traffic delay in seconds here and say, currently seconds slower due to traffic. You've seen this sort of information in various mobility apps as well. Let's give that a try. We can maybe zoom out a little bit and go like from here to over here. Routing currently 162 seconds slower, so you'll lose about 2.5 minutes. So there isn't that much traffic along that route right now. I don't know when the rush hour times are in Barcelona, and of course currently maybe there's a slightly less rush hour anyway than there usually would be. So there's a bunch of information you can get out of here. What's also interesting is you see this get sections, which is another list. And when you put in multiple waypoints, then each part of the route in between the waypoints is called a section, and you can get individual information on that. So if we look at this here, we just have one section, but if we have, let's say, 4 different waypoints, we'll route this, then this would be a section, this would be a section, and this would be a section. You can get the list of sections, you can iterate through the sections, get information about them again. How long does that take? What's the traffic delay there? And so on.
Nice.
There's a lot more in there. You can investigate that yourself and play with that yourself, but that's just that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. So I think what we still wanted to do is play with the parameters a little bit. So first we have the car options. Let's clear that again and let's zoom in a little bit. So we had this kind of, it's tricky to keep it with, doing this with the mouse is a little tricky. So what we have, so we'll say we're up here and we'll want to go down here and we'll do routing. So what it'll do is it'll do this. I can follow the big road here, go down to the harbor, follow the big road. So you'll notice it does not take a direct route through all of these little little streets. However, if we change this to pedestrian options, taking the default pedestrian options, I would presume, I don't know, I haven't tried it yet, which is always, it's always good to try things you haven't tried that yet on a live stream, but I feel like it should look different. So we'll do this. I think we were roughly about here. The map was slightly rotated, but I think that makes sense. And then we were roughly about here. So we'll call the routing API again, and boom, you can see it goes right through. Now it really takes the direct road.
And there's no traffic.
Yeah, there's obviously no traffic because with pedestrian routing, you will not get any, you will not be held up with traffic. So that automatically becomes zero. So you can immediately see the change you have if you change the mode of transit. I wonder if we switch this to the third mode, which is truck options, which can get really complicated. There's a lot you can put in there. And we can do that in a minute. But let's see how it looks like if we do it. Oh, I think I have to.
You mean, when you're saying that, you mean options like the weight of the truck and things like that?
Exactly.
Okay.
Or you might have something hazardous in the back.
Oh, right.
And all these kind of things. So going here. And you'll see actually, you'll take an even bigger route.
Yes.
Around it. And this could be for multiple reasons. I've not, but mostly it will give you a route that is easier for your truck to drive. So the old road, it may have had either some sections where you're not allowed to drive a truck. There might have been a tunnel or a bridge or just an area that's just where they're saying trucks are not allowed here. Or there might have been a turn in there that would have been very tight for a truck to take, where you just physically couldn't have driven. So it takes things like legal restrictions into account, but it also takes things like just the physical restrictions that you have with a truck into account. If it has a certain height, you're not going under certain bridges. You can try, but then people are going to film you, put you on the internet, and laugh at you. And your boss is going to be angry at you. Which makes it really important that if you're doing routing with a truck, you do not use a normal car routing algorithm, because you will drive over a truck that cannot take a bridge that cannot take the weight of your truck, and it's not going to be a fun afternoon.
Right.
So we can look at some of those parameters as well, but for now maybe we'll look at the car options. So we'll just name this options here, and then we'll say up here car options equals new car options. And this takes 3 other options objects: a route options, a route text options, and an avoidance options object. The route text options is mostly for, we haven't looked into this, but the routing API will also return you kind of written instructions. So not just, it won't just write this on the road, but it'll literally say, you are here, now drive 200 meters, then turn right. After you've turned right, drive for 300 meters, go into the intersection, and all these kind of things. And you can switch various text options there, including, do you want HTML highlighting in there? Do you just want raw text? Or which language do you want it in? Do you want it in German and let Michael pronounce it and everybody suffers? Or do you just want it in English? There's avoidance options where you can say things like, hey, please don't route me through this area, or please avoid certain types of roads, and so on. So I'm gonna just go with route options. We'll create those, and then just say here, go with default options, new route text options, and new new avoidance options. So what we need to do now is we'll set up a new route options object, call it route options equals new route options. Now I'm going to have a look at my notes for some interesting things. Oh, we talked about alternatives. So we can now say route options dot alternatives and set them to 3. Won't necessarily change anything because we're only grabbing the one here.
Right.
But what we can play with is just change that value and see what the other routes look like for a similar test. Something else we could set is optimization mode, and that is either fastest or shortest. And if you've ever used our routing API, you know that one of the things you put in is the mode of transport, which we do by doing car options, and the other thing is you do the optimization strategy, which is, do you want the fastest route or do you want the shortest route? And based on traffic, these can be wildly different. But in most cases, we want the fastest. However, we can switch this up a little bit and set this to shortest. Now, if you want to go into truck stuff, there are things like hazardous goods, and then you can set things like, oh, what I've got in my truck is combustible, or it's poisonous if you inhale it, or it's radioactive. So really all the kind of things that generate supervillains you can have on the back of your truck, and then very often you're not allowed to drive in certain areas, and it'll take that into account. But for the truck options, you could also say things like you said earlier, the dimensions of the truck, how wide is the truck, how high is the truck, how heavy is the truck. There's a crazy amount of options that you can put in there. We're going with some simple things here, but we're asking for 3 alternatives, and we're setting the optimization mode to shortest. And what we can maybe try was we'll just run this. Open this up. And then we'll start at this metro station as the starting point, and then we'll end at this metro station here as the end point, because we can remember those. We'll hit routing, and this is the shortest. And we'll see it's 217 seconds slower due to traffic. So now we'll do the same thing, and we'll switch it to fastest. It doesn't help that we've switched it. We should have left it at how long does it take. That would have made it easier. But we need to run it again. We'll see if that gives us a different result. We'll start here. We'll end here. And now we'll have fastest. And we'll see. Now I don't think it's that much of a difference. So not a great example. The problem is what makes a great example changes from minute to minute because it is completely traffic dependent.
Right.
I'd probably have to go and zoom out further and maybe do something like this and this. So I guess in theory, the shortest route would be straight through the city here, but the fastest route will almost certainly be one of those highways.
Right.
So we'll do this now. This is fastest. So now we'll try this again with shortest.
You think you can remember those 2 points?
I can remember those 2 points because I picked them right at the edges of the. This one and this one. Let's see if that works. Yeah, and you'll see
Yeah.
the shortest goes right through the city, and you'll immediately see 473 seconds slower. Still
Right.
not a massive amount of traffic, but it adds up to a couple of minutes traffic here. And obviously this is much shorter distance-wise, but it'll be much faster going
Cool.
on the highway here. So that's looking at options, and really I think that means we've covered all the basics of routing with the HERE SDK for Android.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions? Do people in chat have any questions?
I don't see anything in the chat. You ready to go?
Which means it's either they're all completely confused, or I was so good that they understand everything.
It's one of those two.
It's one of those two. Let's not investigate which one it is.
Okay. All right, you ready to go back to the studio?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, hey, one of the things that I really enjoyed about that demo, which amazingly you did really with all the discussions that we had in a short period of time, not only did you get the working routes going, but I love the visual displays of seeing the various routes doing either with the pedestrian view, the car view, or the truck view. It really does tell a good story for the routing algorithms that we have, because that was an awesome visual display of those things. So even though that wasn't really what your point was, it really also is it's a good testimony for developers to see this is why we are proud of our routing algorithms, because they really do showcase and feature what they should, right? So I like that.
In fact, I mean, one of the slightly annoying things about the routing REST API is that if you get a response, you can't really immediately see where the route goes. So it's hard for you to understand that, because it throws a list of latitudes, longitudes, or even a compressed route at you, but you can't see it. So this is a nice way to just visualize that. I am going to post into chat our routing reference client, which is actually a really nice web tool for exploring the routing REST API, where you can check those kind of things and explore all of the features of the routing API, even without having to write your own code. So that really allows you to explore those things, what happens when I change parameters quite systematically and in an easy way.
Cool. Very good. Well, as far as like closing comments or thoughts, is there anything that you would like to basically make a shout out to?
Yeah, shout out to Sina, who did an awesome episode of Home Office Hours with you last week. Also, shout out to her excellent chicken shirt. I need to get a better shirt game going for these various episodes, as Sina has pointed out to me. And I think we're making some changes to Home Office Hours. We've pointed that out a couple of times, but maybe you want to do that again.
Sure. So last week on Thursday, we had our premiere with Sina doing our Home Office Hours Americas, which really just means adjusted the time zone to be kind of more in a sweet spot in the early or late afternoon, depending if you're on the East Coast or the West Coast. However, you can perhaps talk about what's going on this Thursday.
Yeah, I would do that if I knew what this Thursday's Home Office Hours is going to be about. The whole point of Home Office Hours, it's a casual show, and I'll usually just talk about what strikes my fancy that week. And I spend all my day prepping for this, so nothing has struck my fancy yet. Though I suspect that will happen during the next two days.
Yeah.
The Home Office Hours for Europe, Middle East, Africa, for the time zone that's convenient for folks who are living there, is not gonna change. It's gonna remain the same as it always was. We've just now added another option for people who live in the Americas, so they don't have to get up early in the morning to listen to you.
Right. Although they could if they wanted to.
Absolutely.
Right.
And similarly, if people in Europe wanted to stay up late and have you and Sina sing them to sleep, so to speak. They can also stay up late and enjoy that. So we're not the content will rarely, if ever, be geographically specific. This is just a bunch of time zones we have, so everyone has a chance to watch home office hours, and also on our team to do home office hours, so we can spread this around the team a little more. My hope is eventually we'll have an APAC region time zone home office hours as well. And that way I don't have to do all of the home office hours, and other people can do them as well, which is fun for them, fun for everyone.
Exactly. Very good. Well, any other closing comments?
Nothing except that if we close now, we have once again managed to start an episode on time and also finish it on time.
Exactly. So with that, I'm going to say adios, goodbye to everybody, and we'll see you hopefully next time on either, it won't be a next episode of Waypoints for this season, but hopefully on one of our future home office hour episodes, whether in the Americas or in the for Europe or Africa or whatever it was that Richard said. So we'll sign off now. Take care.
Bye bye.